The prevailing analysis is obsolete. Media fixates on kinetic theater, hypersonic missile tests, naval deployments, and stark warnings between nations like Israel and Iran. This is a deliberate misdirection, conditioning the public to watch the sky for a threat that will never be announced. While legacy outlets track conventional arms, they ignore the primary vector for systemic collapse. The math is irrefutable. No rival can win a conventional, kinetic war against a hegemon. Therefore, they will not fight one. The real battleground is silent and deep. The central nervous system of the global economy is not a carrier strike group. It is a network of undersea fiber optic cables. These conduits are the functional basis for Western solvency, transmitting trillions in liquidity and command and control data per hour. A rival power facing a solvency crisis, such as Pakistan rapidly executing a naval expansion, does not need parity. It needs leverage. CSIS reports confirm the strategic calculus. The cost of severing these nodes is statistically insignificant compared to the systemic financial liquidation it would trigger. This is the blueprint for asymmetric escalation. The objective is not destruction, but paralysis. By cutting the cables or blinding satellite networks, an adversary does not declare war. It triggers a system-wide crash. It creates the blind Leviathan, a hegemonic power with immense kinetic force but zero situational awareness. Its markets freeze, its supply chains halt. Its automated defense networks, deprived of data, enter a launch-on-warning protocol, unable to distinguish a communications failure from a decapitation strike. The escalation is not a choice. It becomes a mathematical consequence of the hegemon's own automated protocols. The trigger isn't a missile launch. It's the sudden, terrifying silence. The official narrative is a strategic misdirection. The Ukraine conflict is not a war of choice. It is a solvency crisis rendered in kinetic terms. When a state's balance sheet collapses, its ability to project conventional power evaporates. What remains is a mathematical imperative to find a cheaper, more decisive vector. Analysts at CSIS have noted the war's status as a profound domestic liability for Russia. The kinetic cost, the expenditure on munitions, logistics, and personnel is unsustainable against a backdrop of sanctions and contracting economic output. A nation cannot deficit spend a conventional war indefinitely. This isn't politics, it is accounting. This is the pivot point. When conventional superiority is no longer economically viable, the system is forced toward asymmetry. The goal shifts from attrition to shock. A single, low-cost, but high-impact weapon system can offset an entire fleet of expensive, conventional assets. This is the logic of the cornered rival. This blueprint is not unique. Observers note Pakistan's ambitious plan for a 50-ship navy, a massive conventional liability for its economy. We see parallel escalatory pressures and warnings from Israel's UN ambassador regarding Iran. When a state is existentially threatened and conventionally outmatched, the economic equation forces a pivot to unconventional deterrence. The risk is not a leader's decision for war. It is a systemic consequence of insolvency. Weakness does not lead to peace. It forces innovation in destruction. The final escalation is not a choice, but the last remaining entry on a bankrupt state's ledger. A launch-on-warning posture becomes the only affordable defense protocol. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. According to analyses from institutions like the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a legacy armor platform, a $5 million main battle tank, can now be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a tactical shift. It is a systemic financial disruption. We are witnessing the democratization of violence, where the barrier to entry for projecting lethal force collapses. A state no longer requires a vast industrial base, such as Pakistan's planned 50-ship naval expansion, to project power. When facing a solvency crisis, a rival state will not attempt to match a hegemon tank for tank. It will leverage this new, brutally efficient cost-benefit ratio, mass-producing the $500 liability for its opponent's $5 million asset. The mathematical certainty is that a conventionally superior but economically insolvent power becomes exponentially more vulnerable. Escalation becomes the only financially viable strategic option for its rivals. The primary kinetic theater is a misdirection. While legacy analysis focuses on flashpoints like Taiwan, internal documents confirm the consensus that no one wants a war in that direct manner. The real staging grounds for systemic conflict are the planet's gray zones, regions where state authority is fracturing. These zones function as proxy laboratories. CSIS and RUSI analysis flags escalating instability in regions from southern Africa to the political infrastructure of Western nations, not as the cause of conflict, but as a symptom. They are sandboxes for staging economic and fourth-generation warfare, designed to test the kinetic cost of disrupting the hegemon's supply chain. This protocol is visible in the hardware acquisitions of secondary powers, while diplomatic channels broadcast stark warnings between states like Israel and Iran. The material evidence provides the blueprint. Pakistan's confirmed naval expansion to 50 ships, including 20 major surface combatants, is a mathematical certainty, not a speculative program. This is not a fleet for conventional parity. It is an asymmetric lever. Facing a solvency crisis, driven by what the Guardian terms IMF sane-washing of economic emergencies, a rival cannot afford a symmetric arms race. The objective is to acquire the minimum force necessary to threaten the hegemon's primary liability, global liquidity, and trade. The systemic threat is therefore not a deliberate invasion, but a launch-on-warning posture applied to economics. These gray zone assets will be used to impose a cascading solvency crisis on the hegemon's network at the first sign of existential economic pressure. The escalation is not a policy choice, it is a mathematical function of national insolvency. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy for victory, it is a solvency protocol. It dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal upon receiving credible warning of an inbound attack before enemy warheads detonate. The logic is a zero-sum calculation. If you wait for confirmed impact, your own kinetic assets are liquidated, rendering retaliation impossible. The doctrine's purpose is to guarantee a devastating counterstrike, making a first strike unwinnable for any aggressor. This protocol, however, contains a systemic vulnerability in the modern era. Analysts at CSIS and RUSI identify this as the fog of digital war. The doctrine assumes the integrity of the warning data from radar and satellite networks. A sophisticated cyber attack can blind those systems, creating a false positive or, more critically, a complete information blackout. In that moment, the commander faces an impossible dilemma. Is the radar failure a technical glitch, or is it the precursor to a decapitation strike designed to neutralize command and control before impact? The protocol forces a decision based on risk analysis. The cost of launching on a false alarm is catastrophic, but the cost of not launching during a real attack is existential annihilation. Faced with a complete loss of situational awareness, the doctrine mathematically compels a launch out of fear. The cyber attack becomes the trigger, forcing the hegemon to initiate its own guaranteed destruction. This is asymmetric escalation. The mathematical certainty is that a systemic solvency crisis in a hegemonic power forces rivals into asymmetric escalation. The calculus is not emotional. It is a balance sheet liability. When a state can no longer afford conventional parity, it is forced to leverage vectors where the kinetic cost is low, but the economic impact is catastrophic. This is not a choice, it is a function of insolvency. The initial phase is not a launch on warning scenario. It is a calibration shot, a limited, non-kinetic event with maximum economic and psychological impact, engineered for plausible deniability. The objective is not to initiate war, but to signal new capabilities and test the response protocols of a distracted and over-leveraged system. Analysts at RUSI have modeled these events as pre-conflict economic shaping operations. Given the stark warnings issued by regional powers like Israel towards Iran and the naval buildups observed by actors like Pakistan, the primary risk vector is maritime logistics. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a coordinated cyber event targeting the port operating systems of a major commercial hub in the Persian Gulf. The result will be a multi-day blackout, paralyzing container traffic. It will be officially attributed to a software glitch or a non-state ransomware group. It will be neither.